Okay, we did it. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today for this side event of the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, where we will be launching our photo exhibition, and we are dedicating this Loss and Damage event to the Loss and Damage in Focus, 10 years of the Warsaw International Mechanism launch event. So we are gathered here because we are commemorating a very important milestone, which is 10 years since the establishment of the Warsaw International Mechanism and its Executive Committee in COP19 in 2013 in Warsaw. So the side event that we are starting now, it's going to start a process of various occasions where we will be commemorating this milestone and reflecting on the important work that the WIM has helped to facilitate and to catalyze in the last decade, while also looking at the works that still remains ahead of us and that we all have present when we're talking about loss and damage and the importance it has in the agenda today. My name is Camila Minerva Rodriguez. I am going to be moderating for you today. I have the pleasure to serve as an ExCom member for the past almost 2 years, and very glad to be part of the group of champions that is organizing the commemoration of the 10-year anniversary of the Warsaw International Mechanism and the various events that will take place as we move forward with the year. So today we will be commemorating this in 2 ways. First, we are going to have an opportunity to reflect on the 10-year milestones since the establishment of the WIM by reflecting on what these 10 years have meant for the institutionalizing efforts aimed at averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. And for that, we will be hearing from a panel of various esteemed experts who are some of them present, some of them past members, either of the ExCom or of its expert groups, so who are very well placed to reflect on what has been done in loss and damage, what the role of the UNFCCC and the ExCom has been in conceptualizing, addressing, minimizing, and guiding the work in loss and damage. And secondly, this event will serve as an opportunity to launch the Loss and Damage in Focus, 10 years of the Warsaw International Mechanism photo exhibition. So we will be starting a call of entries that will lead to a photography exhibition later this year, finalizing at COP28. So we will be getting into a lot more details on this. And to get us started, I am very pleased to introduce Mr. Frode Nergard, whom I'm sure I've butchered his name. But he is our ExCom co-chair, and he will give some opening regards on behalf of the ExCom.
Thank you, Camila. Let me start by warmly welcoming you all here to this side event. I'm really pleased to see so many in the room, of which many are familiar faces, as Camila said. I guess a good crowd of WIM ExCom alumni also present here, and many new faces as well. As Camila said, this is a very special occasion, a side event on loss and damage in focus, 10 years of the Warsaw International Mechanism, since this is the year in which we commemorate the WIM 10-year anniversary. We are all aware that loss and damage is a challenge of growing urgency and gravity. The latest IPCC reports have further confirmed what we already knew. Losses and damages associated with climate change impacts are occurring worldwide at all levels of society, affecting all economic sectors and every ecosystem which human livelihoods depend on. The growing gravity, scope, and frequency of loss and damage in all regions of the world is resulting in devastating economic and non-economic losses. While impacts are felt across the globe, they are and will continue to be felt disproportionately by the most vulnerable people and communities and countries. The Warsaw International Mechanism was established 10 years ago at COP19 as the main catalyzer under the UNFCCC process for responding to loss and damage associated with climate change impacts by enhancing knowledge, action and support, as well as strengthening synergies and coherence of such efforts across a broad range of communities of practice and stakeholders. Guided by its executive committee, the WIM promotes integrated and coherent approaches to loss and damage associated with climate impacts. Responding to loss and damage is a complex challenge that requires multidisciplinary solutions. Accordingly, knowledge and expertise are required beyond what exists in the climate change domain. The ExCom mobilizes and catalyzes such resources from a broad mix of expert organizations and networks through its 5 technical expert groups on slow onset events, non-economic losses, comprehensive risk management, displacement, and action and support. 2023 marks an important milestone for the WIM. At today's event, we will have the opportunity to reflect on the advances made in institutionalizing the efforts and approaches to respond to loss and damage that have been made in the last decade. And we will highlight ongoing efforts catalyzed by the WIM ExCom and also touch on challenges that remain. I will leave further reflections on this to the panelists. We will also have the opportunity to hear more about the Loss and Damage in Focus 10 years of the Warsaw International Mechanism photography exhibition that we are planning to organize at COP28 and the call for entries that will be launched today. I will leave it to our able moderator, Camilla, to take us through the details about this a bit later. Before passing on the microphone, I would like to say a couple of words on why we have chosen a photography exhibition to commemorate this important milestone. The answer for me is simple. Seeing is believing. A decade after the establishment of the WIM, we do not need any further proof of the devastation that climate change can cause, especially for communities at the front lines of climate change. But we do need to see how communities are responding. In order not to get discouraged by the complexity of the challenge, we need to see how communities are implementing approaches to address loss and damage in different regions and contexts. The aim of the exhibition is to give an opportunity to those that are already responding to loss and damage to share through photographs their stories with the rest of the world, and by showing us solutions in action, helping us believe that effective solutions are possible. I wish us of all a successful event and the beginning of a fruitful and dynamic conversation that I hope will continue both with words and with images for the remainder of this year and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair, for reminding us that we're putting in the front lines the people that are experiencing loss and damage in their daily lives, and that we are looking to visualizing as well some of the solutions and the grassroots efforts that take place every day when averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. And this exhibition and this call would not be possible without the support of the incoming presidency in ensuring that loss and damage has a space in the agenda and also in the corridors of the next COP. So we'd like to hear now from Mohamed Al-Sheraifi on behalf of the COP28 presidency.
Thank you, Camilla. First of all, I would like to thank Frode and Jerome and the rest of the ExCom for giving me the space to speak here And also I'd like to extend the thanks to Paul, Anne, and the rest of the Secretariat for all their good works. Also, I'd like to wish a speedy recovery for our friend Miwa, and hopefully we'll see her good and well in COP28. I come from the United Arab Emirates. It's a small nation of population less than 10 million, but we have more than 200 nationalities working and living and staying in the UAE, and they are part of us. We were fortunate to have all those people coming from all over the world to share their knowledge and experience and help us build our nation. Even our President, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, he stated that while we should be proud of our culture and our heritage, we should know there is so much good outside, and we should embrace this good and make it a possibility for us to grow. That's why I see a lot of resemblance of what the Warsaw International Mechanism can do. It's a platform to share knowledge, experience in facing loss and damage from all over the world, and this will help us fight loss and damage. As you know, there is no silver bullet to fight loss and damage. The loss and damage fund and funding arrangement is a crucial element, but it's just one part of the equation. The other part comes from the WIM and from the Santiago Network, and even the processes outside the UNFCCC. With all this collaboration, hopefully we'll be able to make a change. With that, I look forward to seeing a great product in COP28, and I welcome this exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, for the encouraging words. And we, as the ExCom, are very grateful for the support of the incoming COP28 presidency in organizing these commemorative events that will continue to take place. So with that, our side event is officially open, and I will give you thanks to both of you once more. And I will invite our panelists for today to join me here on this podium. And as Mohammed explained, there are loss and damage action is taking place in a wide variety of places. So we are very happy to have a variety of actors. That are going to join us today. So while we wait for our panelists to set up, we've had an opportunity. The idea is for this to be participative, and you can also ask questions. We will try to address some of the questions that you share here. But because this is the first of many events, do bring forward any questions that we have. If we do not have time to respond to them here, we will be engaging with them in the future events that we will hold throughout the 10-year commemoration. And I believe, you have guidance on how to share your questions on the screens. Perfect. Thank you so much. I am so happy to welcome our 6 panelists today, those of you who are present, and Atle, who is joining us online. And you have all throughout the years and in different stages or places, I think we can move, have been very active in the loss and damage space, so are very well placed to reflect on these 10 years and what they have meant for the evolution of different approaches to address loss and damage in countries. So in preparing for this, we invited our panelists to be guided by 3 sets of questions that are now you can all see. And we know that because they come from different backgrounds, they will respond to them from their own experience. And we look forward to hearing about the policy making and the different approaches and solutions, as well as the products that have been developed in various ways through the ExCom and its expert groups. So we will give the floor to each of you. We know you've had directions on time. We're trying to be able to have some questions come in afterward. So we will start with dear Ambassador Soares Adao Soares Barbosa from Timor-Leste, who is a colleague at ExCom, and who I'm sure we're very grateful that he could join us here today. Well.
Thank you, Camila. Good afternoon, Excellencies, friends, and colleagues. I am Adam Soares Barbosa. I am coordinator for loss and damage on behalf of the LDC since 2009. I used to be ExCom members for 6 years, and now I am task coordinator for loss and damage, but also TC member representing the LDCs. So with regard to the policy changes, I think this is a very good question. In the beginning, my position as LDC coordinator was to have 3 different layers for loss and damage. First, we need to have a policy arm. Second, we need to have a technical arm. And then third, we need to have a financial arm. It was not agreeable for everyone to go through, but in fact, we have already established the WIM ExCom. ExCom is as a policy arm under the WIM. And then at, I think, COP25, I think we established Santiago Network to provide, to catalyze technical assistance for averting, minimizing, addressing loss and damage. So this is, from my side, I could see it's a technical arm. And then at COP27, we established fund and also funding arrangement for responding and addressing loss and damage. So this is financial arm. So after 10 years, all parties agreed to answer my concerns. So thank you very much for that. So what have been changed? Firstly, we have established different entities to deal with different loss and damage issues. Under the WIM ExCom, of course, we have already established task force for displacement and different, let's say, expert group for slow onset events so far. But this is only for feeding international needs. And somehow some of works have been reached to the developing countries for addressing, averting, and minimizing loss and damage, but it's not fully addressed. But at least from our policy sides, some technical issues we have already addressed. We have already averted. We have already minimized those things by having the entities and expert groups in place. And of course, the WIM ExCom has done a very great job with regard to the mandate given to the WIM ExCom itself. So this is a very good one. In terms of going through country level, averting, minimizing, and addressing, of course, COP decision has already established national loss and damage contact point. It's depending on the country circumstances, but in fact, some of countries, they've already established their national loss and damage contact points, and some of them, they are using their current national focal point for UNFCCC. So that's how to link policy arm at international level, linking to national loss and damage issues. So at COP in Madrid, we also established Santiago Network issue, and the function was also completed at COP26. I think that's critically important to provide, or at least to catalyze technical assistance for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. This is really good. Please, with us to complete the membership of the advisory board at COP28, and also selection process. There are 2 proposals in place to be selected through negotiation by parties, starting from these SBs up to COP28. So our position will be selecting appropriate and useful secretariat entity to coordinate this, let's say, Santiago Network issues with regard to catalyzing technical assistance. What we are hoping at the moment is that the Santiago Network Secretariat will be facilitating organization, bodies, experts, and organization outside to provide further technical assistance to developing countries. It could be involving all organizations out there with regard to loss and damage issues. So it's also very important, but who is going to coordinate? The Secretariat will be facilitating this role. And in fact, those activities will be reported back to the Conference of Parties through the mechanism that we have set. I think that's also very important. And also, of course, linking to the work of ExCom, that's also really, really good one. But advisory board will be also guiding policy arm to, not policy arm, but providing policy issues to the work of OBNAs to facilitate technical assistance to developing countries. And of course, we are also dealing with Glasgow Dialogue now with regard to the fund and funding arrangement that we established at COP27. And of course, the COP27 also created Transitional Committee with a clear mandate to come up with recommendations with regard to source of fund and also modalities to deliver the fund and so on and so far. So I think for this SB session, one of the critical issues to address this would be Glasgow Dialogue that was also mandated by COP27 to provide further input into the Transitional Committee's work to finalize the recommendation to the COP to fully operationalize the fund and also fund the arrangement for loss and damage. I think that's the policy work, how to see policy work. It's more advanced. It is in the process, but we really need to have a grassroots level activities to at least to avert, to minimize, and to address loss and damage with the community at grassroots level. I think that will be useful. But let us solve our policy and also institutions and also structural first, and then we will address this smoothly after COP28. So we are hoping that COP28 will be delivering two critical issues. One is a fully operationalization of Santiago Network's Secretariat, and also the other one is a fully operationalization of fund and also funding arrangement for loss and damage. So this is from policy issues. But in terms of linking those to the national level, I think by having a Santiago Network, the developing countries can get benefit of capacity to assess their loss and damage needs. So there will be loss and damage national needs assessment process. If they don't have a capacity, and then OBNAs will be there to provide technical support. And then after that, they will come up with a national priorities with regard to financial needs. And then if they don't have enough information, and then OBNAs will also inform them with regard to how to get financial support. But then once their needs are fully identified, and then it will be also good to link to the financial availability under the fund for loss and damage, also funding arrangements that will be also set up quickly after COP28. So I think that's my point, and once again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Adao, for walking us through the many milestones that have led us to or throughout these 30 years of asking for loss and damage, and 10 years since the establishment of the WIM. We would now hear from Ms. Anne Hamill from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and who serves as an expert in our technical expert group on comprehensive risk management. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I have a few slides to share with you all, but I promise I'll keep to the time. IISD hosts the National Adaptation Plan Global Network. And it is a network that is really focused on supporting developing countries in advancing their national adaptation plan processes. And it is with that hat that I was invited on to serve as a member of the technical expert group on comprehensive risk management. I think there was a recognition back then, and this is about 5 years ago now, that adaptation and loss and damage, there were some very practical, technical overlaps, and that the National Adaptation Plan process itself had a role in trying to address some of the issues that we were sort of contemplating when it came to loss and damage. And so what we've done over the last few months is we've actually taken a look at the national adaptation plans that a number of countries have submitted, 41 specifically as of March 1st of this past year. And we started to sort of unpack them to really understand how loss and damage is or is not being addressed in countries' efforts to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So this is just a quick high-level overview for folks that aren't that familiar with the National Adaptation Plan process. It's a government-led process for addressing medium and long-term priorities for adapting to the impacts of climate change. And the NAP process itself has a lot of assessing of vulnerabilities to the impacts of climate change, identifying options for minimizing these vulnerabilities, and then implementing these options. And our starting point here was this is really a great starting point for identifying loss and damage needs. Next slide, please. And so the reason we really decided to take a dive into national adaptation plans is that we think that they are really relevant to the loss and damage conversation because they contain information and analysis that facilitates an understanding of country-specific losses and damages. They provide insights into countries' understanding of the relationship between adaptation and disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management. And then they include also a number of national adaptation plans include concrete actions to minimize losses and damages. So let's build on this. Next slide, please. To help frame our analysis, we developed this spectrum of approaches to respond to loss and damages. And so, this is using the language that we hear, the averting, minimizing, and addressing losses and damages. On the left-hand side, averting or avoiding, this is really where we see a lot of the emphasis on mitigation, and we didn't jump into that part of the analysis. We really focused on the minimizing and addressing. And minimizing is about taking the preemptive actions to deal with the observed and projected impacts of climate change. And then addressing is when you've passed those limits of adaptation or you're actually preparing for irreversible impacts of climate change. And on this, on the spectrum, you can see sort of on the bottom, we've listed some indicative actions. And so it's not saying that these actions can only exist at a certain point in the continuum or the spectrum, but it gives you an idea of some concrete actions that can be taken to minimize and address loss and damage. Next slide, please. And so just to get into some of the analysis, just a few takeaways for people to think about. So of the national adaptation plans that have been submitted, about half have made a direct reference to loss and damage. And of these, just over a third are from small island developing states. Next slide. Sorry. Almost all the documents that have been submitted, all the NAPs that have been submitted to date, include elements of disaster risk management. And unsurprisingly, when the most popular in mentions go to risk assessment, and then there's also a lot of mentions of disaster recovery and disaster recovery and emergency response. But risk assessment is the most prominent element of disaster risk management that is mentioned in NAPs. Next slide, please. I'll skip over this one just for time and go to the next slide. All NAPs refer to slow onset events. And among those, increasing temperatures and sea level rise are the most common slow onset events that are mentioned. Next slide, please. Less than half of national adaptation plans refer to human mobility in a more permanent sense. So all NAPs talk about mobility, but in a permanent sense, where we're talking about addressing the impacts, addressing loss and damage. About 40% talk about mobility beyond seasonal or economic migration. And then I think this is the last piece. Very few NAPs address non-economic losses. So loss, and where they do, loss of cultural heritage is the most commonly identified issue. So, you know, in reviewing all of this, we did see that there were some gaps in terms of trying to understand, you know, country needs in loss and damage, but then we also recognize that there's a really strong foundation. And coming from this analysis was a recognition that efforts to address loss and damage can't replicate or take away from adaptation action. Instead, they should really tackle the impacts that go beyond the limits of adaptation. And that might be stating the obvious, but I think that there's an elegant way to address both adaptation and loss and damage, sometimes in the same process, sometimes in a complementary way as well. And this gets to our recommendations. First is just recognize the contribution of national adaptation plan processes to minimizing loss and damage. You know, these are effectively plans. NAPs are plans to minimize loss and damage. There's a lot contained within them that we should be looking at and look at to get some direction on how to start tackling the irreversible impacts of climate change. The second one is build on the extensive work. So not just recognize that there's a lot of useful information in NAPs, but also build on the efforts that have gone into developing these national adaptation plans. We know that the risks and vulnerabilities have been identified for many countries in these processes. So why don't we build on these analyses? Why don't we get different parts of government that are focused on loss and damage, and then teams that are working on adaptation working together? Why don't we look at different ways of doing more integrated risk assessment so that we might actually start looking at loss and damage more discreetly and more deliberately? The third recommendation is support countries in assessing the potential for irreversible impacts. So we know that NAP documents contain limited information and scenarios beyond the limits of adaptation. So there are very important needs there in terms of additional analyses and assessments that are needed. So while NAPs provide a great foundation and something you can build upon, we do know that there are some additional types of information that are needed to really understand the needs when it comes to loss and damage. So guidance for assessing non-economic losses, for example, scenarios for relocation, for example. Let's start providing countries the tools to be able to understand those. Allow flexibility for countries to leverage their NAPs for planning to address loss and damage. So that means, you know, if we really want countries to address, to identify their needs on loss and damage, maybe it's okay if they decide to update their NAP to more explicitly address loss and damage, or they start developing integrated assessments and they have an integrated adaptation and loss and damage planning process. Or maybe they want to do something separate. That's fine, but I think flexibility is the key here to minimize burdens on countries and trying to articulate their needs and having them met. And ensure efforts to address loss and damage focus on the impacts of climate change that go beyond limits. That's stating the obvious, but we know that NAPs will only go to a certain point. The NAPs that we have online right now will only go to a certain point, so make sure that the focus of loss and damage really is on going beyond the limits of adaptation. And then finally, collaborating and coordinating with the humanitarian system to avoid parallel systems and duplicating efforts. Again, we know the actors in the humanitarian system are absolutely critical for addressing loss and damage. There's some collaboration going on with folks responsible for adaptation. Let's keep that collaboration. Let's strengthen it when it comes to loss and damage as well. And those are just the recommendations. And this was just really to sort of speak to some of the policy sort of evolving policy thinking that's happening for those that are active in adaptation and also want to make important contributions to the loss and damage conversation. So we hope that this analysis provides a basis for that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anne, for this very interesting reflection on the links between adaptation, loss and damage, and the humanitarian world, and the necessity for a comprehensive approach amongst them, and those very clear recommendations. We will now hear from Mr. Atle Solberg, who's joining us digitally, and he is from the Platform on Disaster Displacement, and he is an expert member on our task force on displacement at the ExCom. We cannot hear you yet, Atle. Let's work out the... Hopefully we'll be able to hear you soon. We can't hear you yet. I'm very sorry, Atle. You know, we are still getting better with technology, but we are very glad that it allows us to have you here, even if virtually, because Atle has been a key player or a key member of our task force on displacement. So, Adlib, we are trying to solve the technical issue, but what we'll do is that before we get back to you, we'll move on to Ms. Gondbrit from the Sami Council, and she is a co-chair of the facilitative working group of the LCIPP, and she is also an expert member of our expert group on non-economic losses. Gunbritt, thank you for being with us.
Yes, Gito, I also have a surname that is Retter, but Gunbritt is fine. I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for extending this invitation to the Facilitative Working Group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform to participate in this important event. One might say that during the last decades, policy making to avoid losses and damages has undergone an evolution from a reactive to a more proactive and preventive approach. But for indigenous peoples living on the lands and waters, standing in the midst of loss from extreme events, as well as slow onset climate changes, more transformative change towards averting would be needed in the future. There is increasing recognition in the UNFCCC process and elsewhere of the crucial role of nature and our deep interconnectedness with it. Indigenous peoples, viewing nature as akin, hold unique values and knowledge systems that can guide our collective effort to avert, minimize, and address losses and damages associated with climate change. The Warsaw International Mechanism has played an instrumental role in this shift by developing products that assist countries in averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. The FWG appreciates the continued collaboration with the WIM Executive Committee involving a member of FWG as part of the Non-Economic Losses Expert Group. This is an important step towards more inclusive and equitable engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities. Moreover, creating dedicated spaces for interbody collaboration in our respective work plan has fostered a positive and efficient working relationship. This collaboration aligns with the second three-year work plan of the Local Community and Indigenous Peoples Platform, which calls for collaboration with the WIM ExCom, including engaging party loss and damage contact points. The aim is to consider the perspectives of indigenous peoples and local communities in national policies and actions related to the adverse impacts of climate change, including migration, displacement, and planned relocation and loss of cultural values. We invite the WIM Executive Committee to continue our collaboration by 3 things. Engaging indigenous experts and experts from local communities in your expert groups, including in the task force on displacement and the expert groups on slow onset events and comprehensive risk management. Highlighting case stories of the values and knowledge systems of indigenous peoples and local knowledge systems in the implementation of your strategic work streams, and contributing to the development and implementation of the 3rd 3-year work plan of the Local Community and Indigenous Peoples Platform, which the COP will consider at its 29th session through the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice at its 60th session. And I want to comment on the photo exhibition as well. While it's a good idea and which we welcome, I think we should be aware that some loss and damage, as erosion, avalanches, forest fires, is easy to take photo of. But I want to draw the attention to the organizers that to illustrate loss and damage, and in particular non-economic loss, in a photo can be very challenging, as these losses are loss of culture and intangible values. So don't let the unseen get out of sight. In closing, I extend congratulations from the FDWG to the WIM Executive Committee on this milestone anniversary. We look forward to the future collaborations rooted in the shared goal of restoring the integrity of all ecosystems and recognizing a healthy and regenerative nature is the ultimate way to address climate change and build resilience for all. Gito, thank you.
Thank you, Gunn-Britt, on giving us some guidance on how to ensure a more inclusive and equitable process, and for starting to engage with the photo exhibition, which is an art exhibition. And there are challenges to showing off the intangible, but art can help us do that as well. And we hope we will have a lot of engagement with this photography exhibition. I'm not okay, so we are still working on our technical issue. So while we resolve that so that Atle can join us, we will have a participation from the very dear Leanne Roper, who now works at the UNDRR, but has been a past co-chair of the ExCom and colleague at ExCom and fellow small island representative. So, Leanne, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. As was said before, my name is Leanne Roper, and I am from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. It's interesting being on this side when prior to this I was a member of the ExCom and also a former co-chair, but definitely still very much a part of the WIM and ExCom community. So first, thanks to the ExCom for extending the invitation to us. I will also like to congratulate the ExCom on initiating this event and launching the commemoration of 10 years since the WIM was established. I wanted also to say very quickly that there's a common saying that a picture says 1,000 words. And so I think we'll be seeing maybe a couple 100,000 words when the photos actually come in. And I think it will tell a story that we all need to hear. I want to start the reflection by looking back. Recently, we had the opportunity of reflecting on loss and damage through the years. I myself had looked, for example, at some of the work that was done under the UN General Assembly, where even before the convention was established, there was a recognition that there's risk that will result from climate change. And this was a catalyst for the establishment of the convention. And whilst at the time the term loss and damage may not have existed, I think it was clear that the intent was to prevent loss and damage from occurring. And if we look as well at the objective of the convention, we see very clearly that it's to prevent loss and damage from taking place. Why am I going there? Simply because when we look back at 10 years and the establishment of the WIM, we recognize that the pace with which we understand and recognize and have been taking action on loss and damage has really grown exponentially since the establishment of the WIM and the ExCom 10 years ago. So then when we look at the first question around policy making to avoid losses and damages and how that has evolved over the last decade, I think it's safe to say that when the WIM was established, there was significantly more understanding and focus on this issue of loss and damage. Coming from the UNDRR, I will say as one example that looking back traditionally, DRR has focused a lot on the response side of the risk management cycle. And in 2015, which was even just after the WIM was established, and we consider the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, we note that it did not only focus on a lot of the response and recovery elements, but it also mentions very clearly the impact of slow onset on communities and bringing that into the focus for disaster risk reduction. We've also seen over the last 10 years that many countries and regions are also giving priority to having an integrated and synergized approach, particularly looking at disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, both of which are important in that averting, minimizing element of loss and damage. Then when we consider what the WIM has been doing over the past few years, there has been quite a lot of work and emphasis placed on knowledge. I'll go to a popular saying as well, knowledge is power. When you know, you can act from an informed position. You can have policies being developed in a way that is using the science, using data, so that you're reducing risk in the future. I recall even in my own evolution in this loss and damage space, where much of the WIM products, even before I was an ExCom member, had helped in my own understanding of loss and damage. And there's a very popular pictorial that was produced that, shows very clearly the economic, the non-economic, the slow onset events, the extreme events, etc. And I think there has been quite a lot of value in those outputs of the WIM ExCom. It has also allowed for the convening of different fora, but also the bringing together of different partners and stakeholders. The UNDRR, for example, is a part of the Technical Expert Group on Comprehensive Risk Management, and there are so many other experts that are a part of this expert group, which, because we like acronyms, the TEG CRM. And so much work has been done in that group and in all the other expert group over the years that has been contributing to how countries understand, view, and can adopt the different recommendations that have been put forward by the outputs of these groups. I think as well, under the WIM, with the establishment of loss and damage contact points, The ExCom has done work over the past few years in trying to have very targeted I would say engagements with these loss and damage contact points, recognizing that at the country level, they will be able to influence policies and plans that can then bring what is happening at that global level and have that national context and implementation taking place there. There's a lot more that could be said on that, but I think we were given some very strict time limits. So with that said, I will just maybe speak a little to some of what my organization has been and is doing. In the plan of action for the TEG CRM, we have included their leadership module on comprehensive risk management, and this fits very squarely in the CRM approaches that is a part of the 5-year rolling work plan of the ExCom. And the aim is to target leaders in particular, but it's also a resource that will be available to anyone looking to understand comprehensive risk management approaches and the role that it plays in loss and damage action. With that said, shameless plug, we have an event on the 12th of June where we will actually be launching this event, this leadership module, and we do hope that it will continue to add value and to expand on knowledge and information on loss and damage, and it will be available free of cost. We're doing it in partnership with the UN System Staff College, and so it will be available online. It will only take about 2 hours of your time in case you're interested in learning more. And as I said before, it is a part of what we are contributing to the work of the TEG CRM and the ExCom. We have also been partnering with entities including the World Meteorological Organization and the UNDP, UN Development Program, on how we can support countries with loss and damage tracking or monitoring. Data is such an important part of this discussion. We have in the past established Desinventar, which many may be familiar with, where countries are able to track their losses and damages, loss of lives, number of persons affected, etc. But we recognize with what's happening in climate change, there is space to expand on this. And so we're having this new system that we're looking to roll out. We had a prototype developed and we had a workshop recently. And we hope that at COP28 we'll be able to have an announcement on this tracking system and to see how countries can benefit from this system within their national policies, plans, data collection, and how that may also fit into other elements of what's happening within the climate change landscape. I want to also add that we are preparing guidance. It is targeting disaster risk reduction practitioners, and it's for them to also understand how to integrate loss and damage in DRR plans and strategies, because without that, the level of risk reduction will not be as strong as it needs to be. And so with that said, I will end there, and thank you once again for inviting us to participate.
Thank you, Leanne, for these news of how we're working together with the UNDRR within the TEG CRM and on how we are forming links between the Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement. So I hear that we have solved our digital issues, and so that hopefully we'll be able to hear Atle now, who is joining us, representing the Platform on Disaster Displacement and as an expert from our task force on displacement. Atle, can you try speaking now, please?
I'm speaking. I'm trying to speak.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, fantastic. So good afternoon, colleagues. And I'm sorry I cannot join you in Bonn, but I promise you I will be traveling to also in particular attend the Glasgow Dialogue as of Thursday. So my name is Atle Solberg. I think there should be a PowerPoint presentation. If Anna or who is in the Secretariat can screen the presentation. Can you confirm, Camilla, that the presentation is screened?
We are working on it.
Okay. So let me just start talking then. So my name is Atle Solberg. I'm head of the Secretariat of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, the PDD. And the PDD is a state-led initiative currently under the leadership of the European Union and Kenya. So today I wanted to talk to you about two things. One is the work we have done under the Task Force on Displacement, which is actually one of the oldest expert group established under the Warsaw International Mechanism. But I also wanted to present to you a project that was launched at COP26, funded by the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD, which is very much embedded in the work of the TFD, the Task Force on Displacement, and some of the recommendation. The project is called Project to Avert, Minimize and Address Displacement Related to the Adverse Effect of Climate Change, PAMAD. So I'll refer to that as I go along. PAMAD. I cannot see a slide on my screen now. Camilla, can you see whether you have, or say if you have a slide?
We can see the slide on the PAMAD project, yes.
Yeah, fantastic.
Can you see it on the... Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say, and Ambassador Barbosa also spelled out that these are some of the historical milestones, I would say, that in Paris, the Task Force on Displacement was created under the Warsaw International Mechanism. And that culminated with the recommendation of the task force in Katowice and welcomed by the parties. We also believe that key milestone for the work of the TFD and our work on displacement is the establishment of the Santiago network in Madrid. In Glasgow, we launched the project, the official launch of PAMAD. And then, of course, we all know that in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27, the Santiago network was operationalized, and there was also a decision on loss and damage funding and mechanism. So this is a little the background. If you could have the next slide, please. I wanted to very quickly remind everyone the recommendation of the Task Force on Displacement, because that is very much influencing the priorities of the task force and also the priorities of the PAMAD project. So for states, there were clear recommendation on policy development. There was many examples where adaptation policies or climate change policies or national planning did not speak explicitly to the challenges of human mobility. There was specific recommendation related to enhancing research and data, and also to strengthen preparedness around early warning system, forecast-based financing, and also contingency planning. Recommendation was also related to support integration of human mobility into national planning, including for adaptation, protect and assist disaster-displaced persons, and finally, facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility. Other important recommendation for other stakeholders was related to access to finance, technology transfer and capacity building, support cooperation on data in particular, and also sharing of effective practices. So these are the recommendations that the parties welcomed at the Conference of the Parties in Katowice. Very much in an attempt to operationalize or put this into an approach for a project. And if you can go into the next slide. In Glasgow, as I said, with the support of the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, we launched a project on action and support to avert, minimize, and addressment related to the adverse effect of climate change. And I wanted to stop here just a second to stress the fact that everything we do under the Task Force on Displacement is very much a partnership. And I'm very encouraged by the messages we have heard earlier today about the multi-sectoral approach. So I will be at remiss if I didn't mention the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the International Organization for Migration, the International Federation for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement, United Nations Development Programme, International Labour Organization, ILO, parties, as well as civil society. So many of the activities under the task force, as well as this project, is a multi-stakeholder partnership project. This project, if you can go to the next slide, has two basic objectives. One is better understanding of displacement in the context of climate change as loss and damage. We do recognize that there are both conceptual but also quantification challenges in related to how to understand displacement in the context of climate change as loss and damage. So that is a work stream where we are both working in global context, but also at national level to strengthen understanding. And the second objective is to enhance action and support for averting, minimizing, and addressing displacement related to the adverse effect of climate change, and very much at the national level. The project has 5 pillars, and those of you that paid attention to the TFD recommendation will see many of these pillars reflected here, but they're also very much a reflection of what our area of cooperation, as was included in Article 8 of the Paris Agreement on loss and damage. So very quickly, knowledge development, strengthening displacement risk assessment, strengthening preparedness for disaster displacement, support integrated planning processes, and then access to financing. This project was launched in Glasgow, as I mentioned, and during 2022, we entered into what we call an inception period. And if we go into the next slide, these are the 4 project countries. So together with Guatemala, Kenya, Bangladesh, and Fiji, we used 2022 to develop national implementation plans, and for these 4 countries to identify their priorities along these pillars. And you can see there is a variety of priorities from these 4 countries, but they all touch upon one of the 5 pillars that I mentioned to you. What I will do now, and also recognizing time, I'll just give you a quick flavor of what we are doing in Fiji, or underway in Fiji, as well as Kenya. So you can see how such an approach is operationalized or put into an approach at national level. So under displacement risk assessment, we are working very much with the government to promote or develop risk information that can support governments, both national and local authorities, to enact or decide on planned relocation when, for example, communities are at risk of sea level rise. And we're also supporting the governments to assessing current and future risk when a planned relocation has already taken place. What happens to communities when they have already moved? So that is one concrete example. We are working with the government of Fiji. Another priority for Fiji, if you can go back, is access to finance. That has been explicitly stated. So one entry point is to support their climate relocation of Community Trust Fund, but also to support capacity building of the National Disaster Management Office on these issues. So this is an example from Fiji, 2 quick samples of activities and approaches at national level in order to support access to finance and also displacement risk assessment. The next country we are working with is Kenya. And under knowledge development, we are working with partners to map and understand better mobility patterns and impacts in different contexts, whether drought-affected areas, shore of swelling lakes, or urban settlements. And we're also working with partners to develop effective practices so that can manage displacement in the context of displacement. That's under knowledge development. And in terms of integrated planning, we are working with local authorities and countries to support understanding of coordination of loss and damage at local level, but also how we can promote strengthened coordination among local authorities. There are more information in all of these 4 national adaptation plan I mentioned. So there's no possibility for me to cover all this in this presentation. And that leaves us to my last slide, which is trying to share with you some initial lessons learned and maybe at the level of recommendation. So one thing which is clearly is that any attempt to avert, minimize, and address displacement must start to support existing policies, institutions, and capacities. And I think we've already heard that from colleagues today. There are already disaster risk management policies, climate change adaptation policies, and loss and damage work needs to link up with these existing processes. And maybe the review cycle or the moment when a government is updating its NDC or its national adaptation plan is hugely important moments where efforts to avert, minimize, and loss and damage can be used. Another observation or recommendation is to overcome silos and build synergies. If you move towards national and local level, loss and damage doesn't really appear as a discrete activity. It needs to be embedded with those working on humanitarian issues, as we heard earlier today, disaster risk management, adaptation, and development. So a key challenge, I think, as we go forward and the institutional capacity to avert, minimize, and address displacement is being built, is that we work on existing structure and we don't duplicate. That should not be an excuse for duplicate, but always with the view, of course, to be able to address residual risk. What is important, and this is very specific to displacement and the work of the task force in displacement, is to understand that displacement, the forced movement of people, is both a symptom of incurred loss and damage. So it's loss and damage in itself. And then it's also a form of loss and damage, but displacement can also drive additional loss and damage. And that means that you need to have a very comprehensive understanding of loss and damage. And displacement must be included in your understanding of loss and damage in order to support comprehensive responses, because the risks are also generated by loss and damage in itself. Displacement amplifies inequalities and vulnerability. It affects human rights, and that's a key understanding, that loss and damage do have a human face, and it really exacerbates existing vulnerability and goes to the heart of some of the human rights challenges of climate change. And maybe my last point, Camilla, I know I spent a little too much time, is that action on loss and damage needs to then account for displacement. That's clearly coming out of the work we're doing. And that means that the transitional committee and the Glasgow dialogue needs to have financing mechanism, both for the quantification and understanding of displacement and loss and damage, but also for having capacity to action and support and dispersing of funding. And we also think, or a strong message is that the Santiago Network, as a convener or a catalytic space, can help us avoid some of the challenges we may see for siloed approach or not being able to build on existing. So we are very supportive of the further operationalization of the Santiago Network on loss and damage, which we believe will be critical for comprehensive and integrated approaches to avert, minimize, and address displacement. Thank you so much for letting me call in from Geneva, Switzerland. There are some context details on the last slide, and I look very much forward to see you later this week in Bonn. Thank you so much, Camilla.
Thank you so much, Atle, for making the effort to join us even from afar and from pointing out some very interesting recommendations on the importance of synergies and on how loss and damage can reinforce itself if we don't address it in a planned and a comprehensive way. So our final panelist, but not less important, is Mr. Simon Young, who is an expert member from our expert group on action and support. Thank you, Simon, for being with us.
Oh, thank you for the invite, Camilla and the ExCo. So, as Camilla said, I'm on the Action and Support expert group, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about actions and, in some cases, lack of actions that I think have happened over the last 10 years in the disaster risk finance and insurance space, which is the perspective that I'm providing here. So we had the launch of the Insure Resilience Initiative in 2015, same time as Sendai, and that evolved into the G20 V20 Global Partnership. And there were some good policy developments coming out of that platform. I would highlight the people-centered principles for DRF mechanisms, integrating DRF with NAPs and NDCs, which goes to what Anne talked about earlier, and also the principles on premium financing. So there was some big picture policy frameworks laid out under that initiative. That's evolved to the Global Shield as of last year, where it's moving more towards nationally led design and implementation of DRF instruments. We need to take care there in developing policy and regulation to ensure that those DRF instruments and their implementation is sustainable. They're not just there 1 minute and gone the next. They need to be embedded in policy and regulation in those countries. I'd highlight that the V20 has been involved throughout since the global partnership in 2017, and it's also driven a lot of advances, including the climate prosperity planning processes, an initiative that was begun last year, and also working with the IMF to integrate climate risk into fiscal policy. These are really important areas where we're embedding the understanding of risk and then the management of risk from a financial perspective into the core operations of budgeting and running a government. We also can't and shouldn't forget disaster risk reduction. There's been a strong link to Sendai, I think, on the DRF and insurance side on the public side, but much less engagement on the private side, I think. And the insurance industry in particular, as the second biggest holder of assets in the world, needs to do more to focus its investments on long-term resilience. There have been some interesting initiatives on that, and regulation can certainly help to drive that, but the industry does need to step up, along with other asset managers. And I think on the policy side, a lot of the progress has been made for sudden onset events, and certainly much less so on slow onset events. And also, I think non-economic losses has also certainly been somewhat underserved, although there have been some good developments on that side too. In terms of the question around, or the prompt around compounding impacts, I think we've made some progress on understanding how these things fit together, how heat links to short and long-term health outcomes, for example, how sea level rise is contributing to different and generally worse coastal flooding. All of these things are complicated, and I think we've made a lot of progress on the understanding side through both highly complex physical models, but also by talking to communities about their own experiences and building them into our understanding. But we haven't really made a lot of progress on the policy mechanisms that are needed to manage those compounding risks. Where they do have a huge impact, though, I think, is on the debt crisis. And it is in no small part due to these multiple shock events, but also these compounding events that many of the most vulnerable countries in the world are facing a huge debt crisis. And we have made a little bit of progress on that. I was part of a team that created what we called a resilience wrapper for Belize when they did their debt restructuring a couple of years ago. That enabled them to get a waiver for their debt repayment after they had a big climate event, and actually in that case, an insurance policy was put in place to pay that servicing the debt servicing payment on behalf of Belize. So Belize, the debt was continued to be serviced, and it was able to use its own resources to mount, or will be able to use its own resources to mount an appropriate response to whatever disaster it is that's caused that clause to be triggered. And we think this approach has some real benefits over other approaches, including the fact that the debt is kept absolutely current. There isn't any kicking the can down the road. And building up the debt, the debt and the size of the repayments that would be necessary further down the road. On the product side, on the third prompt, I think that there are three areas I wanted to highlight. one where I've been most involved is on the risk pools. There are now 4 up and running sovereign disaster risk pools which share risk. These are public good institutions. They're they're run on a commercial basis, but they are public good institutions. They're generating really good information, risk information to build risk understanding, but they're also adapting to the needs of their countries. So I think that that's been real progress. We only had one at when the WIM was formed, and in the Caribbean we now have fully fledged pools in Africa, in the Pacific, and in Southeast Asia. We've made some progress, but not nearly enough on adaptive social protection, and I think that there's a huge amount of potential there for maximizing our use of social protection mechanisms as a vehicle to get support down to the most vulnerable after climate shocks. And then the other area I think we've made a lot of progress, but much more to come, is on joining together anticipatory action, both kind of long-term preparedness and risk reduction, but also near-term anticipatory action with early response. And bringing these two together will maximize the benefits, we think, of both parts of it. So the sum is certainly going to be more than the individuals added together. We've also made some progress on addressing non-economic loss and damage through insurance and trigger-based mechanisms. And UNICEF announced in Egypt the launch of their Today and Tomorrow initiative, which uses what we call the Child Cyclone Index, which is specifically looking at the impact on children. And we've also worked with the Mesoamerican Reef Fund on ecosystem resilience using a trigger-based mechanism. So these are examples of where we're starting to think about more broadly about the deployment of trigger-based mechanisms for non-economic losses. So 3 quick takeaways in closing. I think enhancing adaptive social protection is a very, very key area that we need to get right. Integrating anticipatory action, early response through prearranged trigger-based finance. There's a lot of potential there. And then we need to be really bold in addressing the debt crisis. Those that have done the least to contribute to the climate crisis really cannot be left carrying the can in terms of the burden of economic hardship now, but also reduced or eliminated prospects in the future. And so using some of these tools that we've been thinking about and developing to address loss and damage, to apply them to help bring debt sustainability is really, really important. And with that, I'll close and hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for that view from the Action and Support Expert Group and for bringing in the financial perspective on how we've advanced in thinking about finance for loss and damage, but also some of the challenges that remain. So I would like to thank all of our panelists for engaging with us today. I think it's been very interesting getting into these questions. Before I open the floor for questions, I will like to come to give some guidance or some explanations on the main focus of our event today, and to officially launch the call for entry for the Loss and Damage in Focus 10-year of the Warsaw International Mechanism Photography Exhibition. So as Frode pointed out in the opening remarks, photographs are a powerful, a compelling way to share stories. In pictures, we can see the challenges facing communities on the front lines of climate change. And in photos, we can see the solutions and focus on how communities are also addressing and gathering to find ways to address loss and damage. The commemoration of the 10-year milestone of the loss and damage mechanism is our opportunity to reflect on advances made to date and to put a spotlight on the challenges that remain. It is our opportunity to share the solutions and rise to the challenge of climate change together. We really hope that the photographs that you share will help us showcase to a global audience the approaches and challenges faced by developing countries in responding to loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. But also that they will bring to the forefront the stories of the communities that are at the front lines of climate change. So through September 1st, we will be accepting photos by email from anyone who wants to share their loss and damage story. We want to make it as easy as possible for everyone to participate. So we are now, we have set up a website with all of the details of the exhibition, and you can connect to it directly using the QR code that we are showing behind me and that we will be sharing through the UNFCCC's communications and during the SBs and regional climate weeks. So to make it as participative as possible, we are opening it up to both amateur and professional photographers, as long as the entries are not copyrighted and are accompanied by the release form that we will be sharing, and that is found on the website. All you need to do is fill out the form and submit your image, and there are very few restrictions on the photos themselves. We accept color, black and white, smartphone, digital, scanned, or from film slide. And they can also be edited or adjusted. So the premise is simple. We want to see your story. And we want to bring these stories to COP28 so that we can engage with them as we work to have loss and damage outcomes at COP28. The selection of the photographs will be conducted by the ExCom with additional partners and experts, and we will aim to display them in Dubai, as well as showcasing them in the UN website, on social media, and other platforms. We see this as the start of a conversation that will take place through words and images that will continue at regional climate weeks and at COP28. So before closing up, we'll have very, very, very short. We do not have time for questions, so we are very sorry. We are very happy that you have engaged with us. We know that questions and answers are an important part of these events, and we will strive to have a good presence during the regional climate weeks, where we will be asking you to support us in sharing this call for entries for the photo exhibition, and where we will continue to engage with climate negotiators and with people at the front lines of climate change. So thank you so much to our speakers, to our panelists, and to COP presidency. And thank you to all for joining us here. We wish you a very successful SB 58. And let's continue the discussion.